no pasarán.
Agus a camaradeja ona hancarn den doan. Hola y bienvenidos a nuestro amigos y camaradas de todo el mundo. Welcome, friends and comrades from around the world, to FIBI's online launch and republication of SALUD, an Irishman in Spain, the eponymous book written by legendary socialist republican Peadar O'Donnell from Anclochanlia in County Donegal. We hope the republication of this book, after being 80 years out of print, will bring to a new generation the anti-fascist principles and ideology that inspired Peadar O'Donnell and inspired the International Brigades from around the world who came to defend the Spanish Republic between 1936 and 1939. We hope you'll stay with us tonight for contributions from some political figures and a selection of readings from the book itself. We would like to have been with you in person, but the conditions across the globe dictate that we come to you instead online. We look forward to seeing you all again in person one day, and we hope you enjoy tonight's event.
Shamorin, agus tá mé imaval de Christa FIBI, Friends of the International Brigades of Ireland. Tá mé mahiasavan seo, sanach, in a Rev Peadar O'Donnell in Nidiag. Peadar O'Donnell was an Irish revolutionary socialist, a radical activist who in 1919 established a Soviet in Monaghan Asylum here. And because of the work that he was involved in, he was an ITGWU activist as well, an organiser, he was able to gain substantial rights for the workers in this asylum, reducing their hours from over 90 hours a week to 56.
Today we're launching SALUD by Peadar O'Donnell. It's the first time it's been in print in over 80 years. Unfortunately, due to the COVID situation, we're not having a live launch as we would have loved to have. Unfortunately, we can't come to your house to meet you to discuss Peadar and his works. But we're very grateful that you took the time to come on to Zoom and have a chat with us and to officially launch the book. So I think the first thing really would be to say is, for people who don't know, we've had some people talk about Peadar earlier on, but for people who don't know much about him, could you just tell us who was Peadar O'Donnell?
Well, okay, Joe, to give you a thumbnail sketch of Peadar, let me tell you, he was born in 1893 in a place called Meanmore, a townland outside Dunglow. Very poor land in that part of the county, and also you have the waves of the Atlantic crashing up on the shore. So Peadar was born and reared there. But amazingly, he was able to go to college in Dublin and qualified and graduated as a teacher. He came back to Donegal to teach, and eventually went out to the islands, Innisfree, which I think was the motivation that led him to writing the book, The Islanders, and also to Ironmore Island, where he's commemorated every year by the group in Ironmore. Peadar had such an influence in those islands. I would say Peadar was an islander at heart, and he was the natural ally of fishermen the world over. Now, after the teaching, he went to Scotland to help with the potato gatherers. They were known as tatty hokers, and they were from Donegal and Mayo, an extraordinary kind of a combination of people on the western board, who went and worked most of the year gathering potatoes in Scotland and coming home then with the money that they earned. And that they were able to stay in Ireland because of that. But Peadar found that the conditions that they were living in were quite awful, and he campaigned for that. And during his course of going over to those meetings, he met with Willie Gallagher, who would have been a communist MP, probably the first in Scotland, if not in the United Kingdom. And Willie had a good influence on him. And Peadar then resigned his job as a teacher and became an official of the burgeoning ITGWU, which was the Irish Transport and General Workers Union, now known as SIPTU with other combinations. And Peadar was an extraordinary force in Ulster of the 9 counties. And Cathal O'Shannon in the Labour, in Irish Labour, the Socialist Voice, the Voice of Labour rather, he wrote that Peadar O'Donnell went across Ulster, he went clean across Ulster in glory because he fought so well for the people. And 2 particular examples, I won't go into all the details, but one was the famous Monaghan Asylum, where they had to work 93 hours a week. The women were paid much less than the men, and the men weren't paid much either. They even had to get permission to get married. They couldn't leave the premises. It was antediluvian conditions. And Peadar resulted by taking over the asylum, proclaiming himself as governor, sacking the matron, and asking the workers to occupy the place. Now, the RIC would have been there at the time, and there's a whole story there. But the good news out of all that was it was very successful. And it's even mentioned now in the official records published by hospitals like the HSE, that O'Donnell's influence in getting conditions, improving conditions fantastically well.
Ismisha Tommy McKerney, chairperson of the Peadar O'Donnell Socialist Republican Forum. And looking at this fine sculpture created by Jason Mulligan here in Caledon, reminds us of that great patriot, Irish Republican, socialist, and trade union organiser, Peadar O'Donnell. It was here in Caledon, shortly after he had organised the workforce in Monaghan's mental hospital in 1919, that Peadar organised equally successfully the workers in the mills of Caledon. What changed the situation, however, was the use by the employers of that old evil tactic of sectarianism. Yet in spite of this, and in spite of the fact that Peadar made little secret of his commitment to an Irish Republic, he was able to unite Protestant and Catholic workers here in Caledon, and amazingly encourage the local Orange Band to lead a demonstration of workers led by a red flag through the street of Caledon, demanding an improvement in terms and conditions and wages.
5 brigaders from County Louth. I live in Omeath, so Andrew Delaney from Carlingford, he was one of the brigaders, so just this it's like a story, it kind of grew out of that. So I haven't done this in its entirety yet, so even at home, so be gentle with me. It's called The Winds of Resistance. Carlingford to New York City, 1935. Andrew left his native home to make a better life. New York's harbor waterfront, eager for a start. A young man from County Louth with Connolly in his heart. Bosses and their crony foremen, driven by greed. Andrew got his seaman's ticket and headed off to sea. Destination San Francisco began to organize the labor movement on the ground to better workers' lives. Sailing on the winds of resistance, onward to a battlefield in Spain. You will always be remembered, the 15th International Brigade. Fascist culture building steam, openly and clear. Hitler, Franco and Mussolini's policies were here. realized by Irishman, such a sacrifice they made. They joined the Conley column and the Lincoln Brigade, sailing on the winds of resistance, onward to battlefield in Spain. You will always be remembered, the 15th International Brigade. Oppression against workers had awoken a need for a social change and an end to capitalist greed. Brave young men from County Louth, they answered the call with comrades from Tipperary, from Mayo and Donegal, sailing on the winds of resistance, onward to a battlefield in Spain. You will always be remembered, the 15th International Brigade. Stopping off in Cove, en route to Cherbourg Port, to a training camp in Albacete, 1938, where under Conley's banner we sang his rebel song. English, Welsh, Scots and Irish bravely marched to the front. 16 days of bloodshed, overrun by fascist tanks, surrounded in Candessa, trapped by Edinburgh's banks, sailing on the winds of resistance, onward to a battlefield in Spain. You will always be remembered, the 15th International Brigade. And he never would return to Carlingford's Loch Shore. On Schlefoy slopes, we'll remember him forevermore. Gonna make it.
Of course, there are other connections with Monaghan and Peadar O'Donnell and men who went from this area to fight in Spain during the Spanish Civil War. It's interesting that during an attack on a barracks in Ballytrain near Shantona in County Monaghan, Peadar O'Donnell was on that operation along with Ono Duffy and John Finnegan. Ono Duffy later would go to Spain in support of Franco, while John Finnegan went in support of the democratically elected Spanish government. John Finnegan was killed during the Republican retreat west of Batea in 1938.
The soldiers moved wonderingly, eagerly into the streets. The brave tramp of marching men, the sturdy trundle of the guns, the jumbled clip-clop of the mules. The soldiers would sing or whistle, but somewhere in the morning there was something that set men's eyes searching and kept their lips shut. Plaza de España and the sharp, quietly spoken commands. It's the Reds. Up through the silent Rambla and into the Plaza del Catalonia. It's the Reds. A detachment swept towards Sands, marching into the world of tenement warrens where the new breath of the morning turned sour with the sweaty scent of close-packed bodies of men and women. A thin line of soldiers marching, while piled up on either side there was a sea of life, which might as easily spill down and destroy them as the Red Sea swallowed the Pharaohs. You had great faith, O ye officers of old Spain. Who was it first saw and shouted? Some bothered soul, restless that the night watch had been abandoned? Some old body with the strength to keep a strong grip on sleep? A fidgety mother with an ear sharpened to catch the patter of little lives breathing? Anyway, there was a shout. A room leaped to life and roared. A house leaped to life and roared. A street leaped to life and roared. No speeches, for men and women looked and knew, saw and struck. An avalanche of life. Whole families swept into the bare brightness of the sun, challenging its flash with the bare brightness of their flesh. Barricades. There come moments when all language explodes into dust and leaves alive only one word which fills the whole of life. Barricades. Barricades. Furniture leaped into the street. Furniture. Homes came crashing onto the pavement. Somebody fired a shot. Officers rapped out orders and men obeyed, frowning at the vicious snap of ineffective firing and wondering. From the houses around there came a bombardment of all things throwable. The commandant would appeal to a reason, but he had no voice that could be heard here, and he knew of only one way. At point-blank range, the first shell struck a barricade. A woman's body leaped like a mad thing and crashed against a balcony, her head spinning along the street. Others died here too, but the woman was not only a victim, but a signal. The artillery attachment was doomed, and doomed because it was flesh and was faced here with an uproar of blood calling to blood. The officers alone were beyond reach. The who knows whether in them too, but their time was too short. Soldiers shot them, and not just a cold act of treachery, but the sudden explosion of a new passion. For now soldiers and people were shouting the same cry, even though soldiers were still being killed. But nobody noticed, and suddenly everybody noticed that men were dying who need not die. No appeal could stop this massacre, but cheering could. Soldiers and people in one great uproar. A thunder of guns in the street beyond took the noise out of their throats as thunder might silence children at play. And so they stood, a street full of people breathing, heads high, listening. And then, as though the whole city made itself one great throat to voice all the madness of the world, Barcelona yelled. And still, roaring soldiers and people grappled with guns to hurry the explosions beyond. It was the beginning of the end for the officers in Barcelona. The world fell away from around them, for their soldiers deserted and they stood alone. And so the rising failed in Barcelona and in Madrid. But in Saragossa, in Seville, in Burgos, no streets leaped to life, and the officers hurrying through achieved the height signal back to the old grandeur for historic Spain. And landlords around Badajoz said, "We will get our land back." And worried industrialists said, "Now we will have firm government." And the world said, "Civil war has broken out in Spain."
he went to fight in Spain, and this is a song about him. I haven't done it for a long while, so I hope I'll remember it. From all over the world, men of conscience went to fight in Spain. And Frank Ryan from East Limerick I felt compelled to do the same. So I gathered 80 fighting men to Liverpool, we quietly slipped away. And we came to Albacete from Paris on the secret railway. On the day that we departed, the Irish independence big hero, oh no, Duffy in his blue shirts on the quays of Galway made a holy show. Well, they set their foot on board of a German ship, the swastika she flew. And Cardinal McRory and the bishop said, our blessings go with you. At the Battle of Harama we tried hard the enemy to defeat, but the fascists' better armour, it caused us in confusion to retreat. With their tanks and their mortars and the screaming of their Nazi aeroplanes, their machine guns and their snipers, their shells and bullets fell on us like rain. I set my rifle to my shoulder and assembled some of the exhausted men. I saw Jock Cunningham was doing the same, and we joined our forces then. I said, sing up my lads, and the International it rang out. Men lying by the wayside got up and cheered and fell in with a shout. We went back the way we came, with Jock and I marching at the head, to the singing and the rifle fire and the drumbeat of barbaric lead. And by nightfall we were crawling on our bellies, advancing on the plough. And with joy then we realized we'd regained the ground we lost 10 hours before. But the trail of slaughter that we left behind us caused us a troubled mind. To think of Charlie Donnelly, Kit Conway and all those pals of mine. Our sick, dead and wounded amounted to 10,000 men. But we held our positions and kept them fascists out again. That summer at Brunete, the fascists, they formed a human shield. They sent women and children out screaming on the battlefield. Such a horrifying sight, a little girl was struck by shrapnel in the head. And our only consolation was we shot all them fascist bastards dead.
We'll pass around!
But the heat was unbearable, the thirst nearly driving us insane. And the bloody German Air Force bombed and strafed us out on the Irish, on the bloody plain. With their Germans and Italians, the fascist army couldn't be contained. At Belchite and the Ebro, we mounted our offensives, but in vain. I was captured near Gandesa by Italians and I didn't understand, as the officer commanding, why they did not shoot me out of hand. With their bayonets they prodded me to make me give the fascist salute. I wouldn't give them the pleasure of bringing on myself such disrepute. But at Franco's headquarters in Burgos, the die, it seemed, was cast. I was sentenced to death, thinking every breath would be my last. But for reasons unknown, the firing squad, it never got its chance. I spent 2 hard years in prison before they deported me to France. But the treatment meted out to me in Burgos at the hands of Franco's men, well, it ruined my health and I was never quite the same again. In Berlin and Dresden I lived there for 4 years or so, and it broke my heart that Dev never allowed me to come home. Frank Ryan died in Dresden and was buried there in 1944. A Republican soldier in the Irish and the Spanish Civil Wars. But 35 years later, Frank finally made it home, and he's buried in Glasnevin under a granite tombstone. So here's to Frank Ryan and all his Irish comrades, to the Connolly column and all the International Brigades, to the brave men and women and all those who fought the fascist tide. You are history, you are legend, and your sacrifice fills my heart with pride. From all over the world, men of conscience went to fight in Spain. And Frank Ryan from East Limerick, he felt compelled to do the same.
Read just the short final paragraph of Salud, written by Peadar O'Donnell, and everything is in it, and let you judge for yourself. And this is a book that must be read and read again, and maybe it will motivate you to read more about the whole aspect of what happened during those awful years of the 30s and indeed into the 40s. This is the paragraph. Irish Republicans, smarting at the thought that the fascist Ireland should have sent soldiers to fight against the Spanish people, they all stole quietly away from their homes and made the trek from Barcelona and to Madrid. Thomas Patton of Achill fell outside Madrid one day when a shower was pelting down on the grey earth. In the winter time too, when his homeland was full of the laughter of young folk gathered back in Achill after the season work in the Scottish tatey fields and the potato fields. I had to send them the word. His name will live on in Achill when yours and mine are forgotten.
Hi, my name is Kate Nugent and I'm the grandniece of Jack Nalty. Jack Nalty and fellow Dubliner Liam McGregor were the last 2 Irish volunteers in the International Brigade to die in the Spanish Civil War. I'm standing beneath the plaque that was erected 2 years ago in memory of Jack Nalty's death on the 80th anniversary of it. After his death, Peadar O'Donnell wrote a letter to Jack's family, and I'd like to read that now. The letter was sent to Jack's mother, father, sisters and brothers. I wish it was not just such news as this from Spain that draws this letter from me to you folk. I have delayed until your sharper grief might be softened with the days. Nothing that has happened for a long time has got such power over my thoughts as the death of Jack. You knew him the way a home knows one of its members. I knew him as a great comrade and idealist. We were kin for a long time within the IRA, and drew nearer as ideas cleared. It was my privilege that I got to know him well. Human nature can achieve its own miracles. Surely in these days it is a wonderful thing that in the midst of all the selfish strivings, young men can lay down their lives as Jack laid down his. His first going was a grand gesture. His second going to Spain was beyond words. In face of such happenings, we can only stand silent. What can we say about it all? Jack could not have been any accident. Such a life always has its background in the spiritual qualities and the stock from which he sprung, so that your own reserve to bear his loss will match the spirit that led him to his sacrifice. May I just simply say that I am deeply sorry for you in your loss, that I am sorry too, for he was an old comrade of mine. I join you too in your pride in him. Salud, Peadar O'Donnell.
The song I'm going to sing now is the latest song that I've ever written 25 years later. But once again, the title comes from a book by Peadar O'Donnell, and it's called The Gates Flew Open. In isolation, another day fading, through broken windows flashed the shining path. Steel bars stand helpless like dances of concrete. We see the beauty, we make our escape, and the gates flew open, hit the ground running, cross over the fields into no man's land. Away from the darkness, we make our own shadows. I'll see you, my brother, on the other side. The righteous have gathered outside of the food bank. Glass and graffiti, cheap drink and sing songs. Rise up, Nafina, drown out the death rattle. Lost revolution, it's all good tonight. And the gates flew open, hit the ground running, cross over the fields into no man's land. Away from the darkness, we make our own shadows. I'll see you, my brother, on the other side. Battered and beaten, never defeated. We never hit pay dirt, we reached for the stars. Been down some hard roads, these streets make music. Slán agus bannat till we meet again. And the gates flew open, hit the ground running, cross over the fields into no man's land. Away from the darkness, we make our own shadows. I'll see you, my brother, on the other side. Slán agus bannat again. Sinead.
Un sentimiento de angustia, de dolor infinito, sube a nuestras gargantas. Angustia por los que se van, soldados del más alto ideal de redención humana. Dolor por los que se quedan aquí para siempre, fundiéndose con nuestra tierra. De todos los pueblos y todas las razas, vinisteis a nosotros como hermanos nuestros, y en los días más duros de nuestra guerra, cuando la capital de la República Española se hallaba amenazada, fuisteis vosotros, bravos camaradas de las brigadas internacionales, quienes contribuisteis a salvarla con vuestro entusiasmo combativo y vuestro heroísmo y espíritu de sacrificio. Y Jarama, y Guadalajara, y Brunete, y Belchite, y Levante y el Ebro cantan con estrofas inmortales el valor, la abnegación, la bravura y la disciplina de los hombres y las mujeres de las brigadas internacionales. Comunistas, socialistas, anarquistas, republicanos, hombres y mujeres de distinto color, de ideología diferente, de religiones antagónicas, pero amando todos ellos profundamente la libertad y la justicia, vinieron a ofrecerse a nosotros incondicionalmente. Cuando los años pasen y las heridas de la guerra se vayan restañando, cuando el recuerdo de los días dolorosos y sangrientos se esfume en un presente de libertad, cuando los rencores se vayan atenuando y el orgullo de la patria libre sea igualmente sentido por todos los españoles, hablad a vuestros hijos, habladle de estos hombres, de estas mujeres, de las brigadas internacionales. Contadles cómo, atravesando mares y montañas, salvando fronteras vigiladas por perros, llegaron a nuestra patria como cruzados de la libertad amenazada por el fascismo. Lo abandonaron todo y vinieron a nosotros a decirnos: aquí estamos, vuestra causa, la causa de España, es nuestra misma causa, es la causa de toda la humanidad. Camaradas de las brigadas internacionales, razones de Estado os hacen volver a vuestra patria. Podéis marchar orgullosos. Sois la historia, sois la leyenda, sois el ejemplo heroico de la solidaridad y de la universalidad de la democracia frente al espíritu vil y acomodaticio de los que interpretan los principios democráticos mirando hacia la caja de caudales. No os olvidaremos, y cuando el olivo de la paz florezca, volved a nuestro lado, que aquí encontraréis patria los que no tenéis patria, amistad los que tenéis que vivir privados, y todos, el cariño y el agradecimiento de todo el pueblo español que hoy y mañana gritarán con entusiasmo: ¡vivan los héroes de las brigadas internacionales!
In 1920, he decided to go full-time with the Irish Republican Army because the War of Independence was now being fought, and he joined the IRA and became a doughty warrior during that period. He was never captured. He involved himself in many events, including Derry and Donegal, particularly in those areas and some parts of Tyrone. And eventually, anyway, the treaty came, and he took the side of the Republicans against the treaty. They thought that the treaty was a sellout, and we can discuss that in another day. But it was the beginning of what John Regan, the author who wrote the book, it was the counter-revolution which started back then and lasted, well, you might say, until today. So Peadar's involvement in the IRA, he found himself being jailed. He had never been caught by the British, but he was caught by his own people and was jailed in the Curragh, from which he escaped in 1924. And Peadar at that time was now starting to edit on FIBI, which was the great paper at the time. and it was a crusading paper because it wasn't just a military paper. It wasn't just about the militants, it was about the social conditions, because Peadar had already in his heart that sense of justice, that keen sense of justice, that affinity with the underprivileged, and that ability as a visionary and as a kind of a prophet. He was able to get this thing going, and he found himself in the position where he could lead a campaign called the Land Annuities, which is a story in itself. And he wrote a book on it, There Will Be Another Day, which has been republished again recently. And that There Will Be Another Day is the story of the land annuities. Where just in summary, there was the annuities was the money was being paid back to the British government for the land acts that give the people the 3 Fs, the fixed tenure, fair and all that. And they had to pay that, but because of the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War, there was about 5 years of arrears, and the arrears amounted to millions. And while the annuity in itself wasn't a great burden, but the arrears were. And of course, there was a clause in the treaty between Ireland and England, between the 26 county government and England, that the Irish government would collect these arrears and pass the money over to the old colonial master. Now, Fintan Lawler said, give me such a tax and we really could campaign the country. And he did. And it was an example of the strategy and the techniques. And Peadar and a man called Colonel Morris Moore, they led that. And they particularly were very successful because they forced De Valera, through operating via upwards from the county councils, to declare that he would handle the land annuities if he was elected, which he was in 32. He stopped paying the land annuities, which resulted in the economic war from 32 to 38. And then, amazingly, he got the tremendous treaty from Chamberlain in 1938, where not only did they settle the matter for the £30 million was disposed of, and the Irish government paid 10 million as a final payment, but they also got back the ports, and they never had to pay any more money to the land. So there was a good example of what Peadar could do. And now, in the meantime, gave rise to what he was doing in 1930, because the land annuities gave the big farmers an opportunity to start organising, having lost through Cumming and Ale their place in government, and they started the Blue Shirt movement. And Peadar, of course, started the Republican Congress. But Peadar's involvement in the Republican Congress really stopped the march of the Blue Shirts, and that is a thing that's not often mentioned, but here again is part of his legacy.
There's a grander is this the chasho. Short cha galante, he's there a bit more, to meet up on Lia, and a balaga chahara. Short cha Peadar O'Donnell, ho Peadar is Lillian chasho. Half a nam a darna cockadunda. I guess, shul heart to cha, to just to moho grow Peadar beyond show. I guess, to shin ledger. Ten chasho go fall in Chayla O'Donnell. I guess she looks like a bishop rod tawata. So, a lot of us in West Donegal, from a left perspective, Peadar would be one of those great heroes, an important figure within history. A very radical revolutionary from a very poor part of West Donegal. And this is his house. He built this house back roughly around the Second World War, himself and his wife, Lily. She was from Mayo, Swinford, I think, where both of them, I think, are buried there. But there's a neariness, or a really nice feeling being in this house, that this house was Peadar. And all around the house, it's like a normal anybody's house with photographs of their grandparents and great-grandparents and other family members, wedding photographs of Peadar, photographs, images of Peadar that I've never seen before. And they're important, very important. And Peadar, I suppose, a radical revolutionary, not just that he was in the IRA, but he also was one of the main characters who organised the International Brigades to go out to fight against fascism. A lot of the men that went out to fight were from the Rosses and West Donegal as well. So we're being seen to Broadwell, very proud to be in this house. And Peadar's work with the tatty hookers in Scotland, Peadar's work with the trade union movement, Peadar's writing, Peadar's consistent involvement in left-wing revolutionary politics to his last days are important, are hugely important. Mag le leo seo agus gaisih a bheith just foiidelam. Seo scríb Peadar amach as SALUD a leor, a níos sin a leor a tugam, leor a lethach a halma glendútam. Barcelona is rich in story of wild days when the might of the city demonstrated its sympathy for the independence struggle in Ireland. I knew in a vague way that this friendly city had protested around the British consulate when the execution of the leaders of 1916 Rising was announced. But it was news to me that clashes with the police were an almost day-to-day feature in the Catalonian sympathy for the struggle during the tan days. The death of Terence MacSimne, the Lord Mayor of Cork, after his long hunger strike in Brixton Prison, England, provoked an uproar in Barcelona, such as even Dublin itself did not surpass. Stories came eagerly until one wondered how much robust tales could have remained so hidden. These two people have followed rather similar roads in late years. In 1917, the Catalan deputies withdrew from the Spanish Parliament to meet separately in Barcelona. The conscription threat swept the Irish members out of Westminster. The language question played a part in rousing national feeling in both countries. Under Primo Rivera's dictatorship in Catalan, the Catalan language was forbidden in churches and also in public places. Not many years ago, you would have had been fined in Ireland for having your name in Gaelic on a donkey cart.
Then he founded the Bell magazine, which was a very influential magazine, both academically and also generally, because it filled a great need in Ireland, and he appointed Sean Whelan. And I just read for you, Sean Whelan said about him. Sean Whelan said about Peadar O'Donnell, he said, just one second, I'll just say. He said, Peadar O'Donnell is one of the few writers who can visualize freedom through living characters. Peadar knows it is a matter of community and basic human need in the country or city. He gets down to the soil and the roots. Anyone who wants to know what freedom is about, read Peadar. Now that was some compliment coming from a man like Sean Whelan, who was a great critic and an editor. And when I came to Dublin a few months later, I was introduced to Peadar O'Donnell, and that's how I came to know Peadar. And himself and his wife Lil was from the O'Donnell family in Mayo. They spelt their name with one N and one L. And she herself was a very distinguished and educated and refined lady. And she was, if it's possible to say it, she probably was even more courageous than Peadar, but she had tremendous fire in her belly. And we used to go up there on a Sunday morning after Mass, and Peadar, there'd be a number of us young people usually, and Peadar would talk there and George Gilmer. There'd be various people would drop in because it was known to be there. So out of that grew our involvement with the Glencullen experiment was going on at the time. And then a number of us got involved with Peadar, with workers in Dublin to get financial support for cooperatives. But he wanted not to replace government agencies, but by helping successful cooperatives to highlight the area of neglect in the small farm countryside and particularly in the West. And Peadar's dream all the time was the nexus between the small farmer or the people in the countryside and the industrial worker. Because when a woman left the countryside farm and went to Dublin, Belfast, England, America, they all usually joined a union. So it was a natural place to go. And that was his dream. So all of these things that he did were purely pushing ahead to make, because Peadar would say the dominant tier in society are the landowners, the bankers, the industrialists, and they forced their demands on the government and on the people. And when he was alive, the government economists and commentators would pour scorn on that. Who is the dominant tier in society? The laws are made to suit them, and he wanted to have the industrial worker and the country and the small farmers to imprint their needs on the economy and on the community. So, I was very close to Peadar, and I probably read everything he wrote, and I could never get my hands on a copy of SALUD. I even went into the National Library, and it had been misfiled, and I went back a second time, but I'm sure I would have got it if I persisted, but I knew this was coming out, and Eddie O'Neill passed me out a draft of the SALUD, and I read it, and I read it, and I read it 3 times, and I couldn't believe how amazingly fresh Peadar's words were, his expressions, his ability to compare the Irish situation with Spanish, making it easy to understand for people reading the book. Peadar and myself were very much involved in organising that, trying to get land divided, these big estates. And the amazing thing, Joe, is that the Land Commission had more powers than some of the socialist states had when it came to the question of land. They could take land of the likes of the Duke of Mecklenburg, right, or indeed some of our own Irish landowners, and take the land, and they paid them with land bonds. That you got money, so you didn't get money in your pocket. And because there was a legislation that had been passed for a different purpose by the British government when we were part of the empire, that it was to relieve congestion. And on that basis, you could relieve congestion. So Peadar and myself did all of that, and we were very much involved. And I was involved with him right up until his death. He died in 1986, and it was like a light going out, because the man had a tremendous sense of justice, and he was such a genuine socialist. He practiced what he preached, which I thought was the measure of the man.
Esta mañana me he levantado, oh vela chao, vela chao, vela chao, chao, chao. Esta mañana me he levantado y he descubierto a un paso. Oh guerrillero, quiero ir contigo, oh vela chao, vela chao, vela chao, chao, chao. Oh guerrillero, quiero ir contigo porque me siento aquí morir.
Thank the friends of the International Brigade who have republished this book. And that stalwart Eddie O'Neill, who's been insistent on getting things done meticulously well, and yourself and all the other members of the team. I want to thank you and congratulate you. It's great to keep Peadar's name alive, but more importantly, the people he wrote about, because that's the way Peadar never talked about the past, seldom about the present, always about the future. And this is great for the younger generation, and that's why this book has been relaunched, the SALUD. And it's been republished so that younger generations may learn of the indomitable spirit of so many men and women who stood up to fascism before it consumed the whole of Europe and eventually the whole world in the Second World War. Tonight we salute the memory of those from all over the 32 counties who fought and gave their lives and died in Spain on behalf of the Republic. And we remember with pride and affection those who fought and survived. Finished with the Spanish greeting. Salute.
Yes, all of you fascists bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. Oh, all of you fascists bound to lose. All of you fascists bound to lose. Yes, all of you. Bound to lose. You're bound to lose. You fascists bound to lose. by surprise. The dirty smell of the politician and the man with the greed in his eyes. One big union, that's our plan, and the IWW's your only man. The flames of discontent we'll fan for the cause that never dies. Never tire of the road, never tire of the rolling wheel, never tire of the ways of the world. Way out yonder's a calling me, and the dark road leads me onwards, on the highway that's my code. The lonesome voice that I heard in my head said, never tire of the road. Oh yes, all of you fascist boundaroos, all of you fascist boundaroos, yes, all of you fascist boundaroos, you're bound to lose, you fascist bound to lose.
Esta mañana me he levantado, oh vela chao, vela chao, vela chao, chao, chao. Esta mañana me he levantado y he descubierto a un paso. Oh guerrillero, quiero ir contigo, oh vela chao, vela chao, vela chao, chao, chao. Oh guerrillero, quiero ir contigo porque me siento aquí.